The old line says that in the beginning we were made in God's image, and ever since humanity has been returning the favor, remaking God in our own image. We especially have a way of doing this. We Christians, we church folk, we believers in Jesus, we have a way of wanting to remake Jesus to fit our categories, our expectations, and for him to align with the categories or cookie cutter molds of our day and our time. There's maybe no better example of how that keeps happening than when we try to apply words like liberal or conservative to Jesus, who, number one, doesn't fit into either of the major political party categories of 21st century America, but doesn't really even have a big picture sense of being liberal or conservative in terms of how he holds on to the inherited tradition of God's word or commandments. Because Jesus, on the one hand, can say, don't think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. We heard that last week as we continued further in the Sermon on the Mount. I've come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them, and not a single commandment, not even a stroke of a letter will pass away until all is fulfilled. And then on the other hand, Jesus can say things like, well, like he says here in this next section from the Sermon on the Mount. Literally a paragraph after having said, don't think I've come to abolish the law. Every letter, every last stroke of a letter will be kept in place until all is accomplished. Jesus then moves on to say things that sound like they're upending the law, the very commandments he said he hasn't come to abolish. So Jesus says things like, you've heard that it was said of ancient times, you shall not murder. Whoever commits murder will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you're even angry with somebody, you'll be liable to judgment. If you insult somebody, you'll be liable to the council. And if you call somebody you fool, you'll be liable to the hell of fire. And he continues to sharpen the commandments, saying things like, I know the rules said, the commandments said, don't commit adultery. But I say, if you even objectify somebody, if you look at somebody with lust, you've already broken the heart of the commandments in your heart. Jesus continues and says things like, I know the rules say that you're not supposed to swear a false oath, but I say don't swear any oaths at all. Just be the kind of people who are truthful. And when you say yes, mean yes. And when you say no, mean no. And don't let there be any wiggle room or loopholes or things like that in between. Jesus has this way of saying, I know what the rules said, but I'm telling you something different. And at the same breath, insisting he's keeping continuity with what the commandments of God really have been about all along. This blows apart our categories of liberal and conservative in so many ways. We're used to thinking conservative means you hold on to the inherited traditions, and whatever was handed down, that's what you keep, and you keep wishing for how do we get back to better keeping of the traditions that have been handed down. We conserve them, and that being liberal in the broad classic sense is about being open to changing things, new things. And here's Jesus saying, I haven't come to get rid of the old commandments, but you know what the old rules say, and I'm telling you something different. Jesus speaks as though he really has the authority to tell us what the commandments really were all about all along. That's the other thing, is Jesus clearly is offering or directing changes in how we understand what the core commandments from God mean. Jesus isn't just going loose with them. Jesus isn't saying it doesn't really matter, who cares if you murder, who cares if you insult. He's not loosening things the way sometimes you associate being liberal as just loosening standards. Jesus here is sharpening things. And yet, he's not just being a jerk about rules. He's not saying, if you thought it was hard to be righteous before, I'm here to make it even harder. Jesus, by the way he sharpens the commandments, is getting at something deeper than just, did I officially follow what the rules say? Did I do the bare minimum to get a positive on my permanent record? Did I avoid getting red marks on my permanent record? Jesus instead says the commandments have always been about how we love our neighbors. So when Jesus says things like, I know the rule said don't commit murder, but now I'm telling you don't insult somebody else. Don't be angry or hateful toward somebody else. He's saying, I'm calling you to love people. It's not just an emotional thing, but how will you practice doing goodness, doing good to other people, even if they haven't been good to you first? how will you show love to a neighbor? The threshold is not just, did I avoid murdering somebody today? But have I actively loved people? Have I actively sought their good? Have I avoided falling into that trap of insulting or thinking of somebody cruelly or being hateful toward somebody else? That's what Jesus says the commandment has really always been about. Murder was just sort of a shorthand for, yeah, don't kill anybody, but actively seek the good of other people. Similarly, when Jesus sharpens the commandment against adultery, he's not just saying, all right, well, as long as you didn't actually sleep with somebody else you're not married to, as long as you didn't actually physically break your marital vows, you're fine. But Jesus is saying, when we treat other people as objects, when even in casual ways I make other people just there for my gratification rather than within the context of faithfulness and of love and of self-giving, I'm missing the point of what the commandment was. Jesus calls us to better love one another in every facet of our lives, in every direction, in every kind of relationship. With the people we don't like, that we're not allowed to murder them, but also not to be hateful toward them. With the people we've made promises of love and fidelity to, that we are not allowed to look for loopholes around what counts or doesn't count as cheating. And even in our everyday speech, when Jesus sharpens the commandment about oaths, and he says, don't just worry about whether what you said was officially under oath or you swore on a Bible, but just be somebody who's truthful all the time to everybody. That doesn't fit our molds or our expectations or our categories. But, well, is Jesus being liberal or conservative here? Neither of those words is helpful here. Instead, Jesus says God has always been about people loving their neighbors. And that neighbor is a pretty expansive term. It includes people I like and who are nearby me, people I don't like and would rather not have to cross paths with, everybody in every direction. Jesus is just not interested in fitting our expectations, our categories, and certainly not our political parties. Instead, Jesus has always been about helping us to become people who love, which is what God's intention for human beings has been in the beginning. And yet also, Jesus is willing to radically redesign or reimagine what the commandments are, the things that had been carved in stone, literally carved in stone. Jesus is willing to say, I know that's what was said, but I'm telling you something different. That is both simultaneously really, really liberal sounding and also deeply, deeply conserving of the tradition he's been handed. Jesus has this way of being both and neither at the same time, almost as if those words aren't what are important, because Jesus isn't interested in just giving power to one group or to another, but rather that we be people who in everything we do love people in every direction. That's what it is to be people who take Jesus' teaching seriously, people who are being stretched to grow in love for God, for neighbor, for stranger, for enemy, for everybody. Love in every direction is what it's really all been about. And that breaks apart the labels we are used to, the ways that we categorize and hem each other in as you're somebody I like, so I'll be nice to you. You're somebody who doesn't agree with me, so I won't be nice to you. None of those categories apply. And Jesus redefines everything. Can we dare to let Jesus redefine things that way for us this week? That's the conversation we're having this Sunday as we dig further into the Sermon on the Mount and how Jesus redefines and also reclarifies what God's goodwill has been all along. Join us for that conversation this weekend. See you Sunday.